The ocean glimmered outside the glass walls of La Mer Étoilée, the most exclusive restaurant on the coast. Inside, whispers moved faster than champagne, not about the food, but about her. Catherine Vale, the millionaire's wife, sat at her usual corner table, diamonds glittering like warnings. No one crossed her, not the maitre d', not even her husband's business partners. She ruled with icy elegance, a smile that froze hearts and silenced rooms. Then, that night, a new waitress walked in, Elena, nervous, observant, carrying the kind of humility Catherine despised. No one noticed her at first, but before the night was over, she would do the unthinkable, and the woman everyone feared would never recover from the humiliation. Catherine Vale didn't walk, she glided. Every movement was deliberate, calculated, the choreography of someone who'd learned early that control was survival. Her reflection shimmered back at her from the restaurant's mirrored walls. Flawless makeup, perfect posture, that diamond serpent necklace her husband bought to apologize for something. She couldn't remember what anymore. There had been so many apologies. La Mer Étoilée was her kingdom. The staff trembled when she entered, adjusting silverware, straightening their collars. She fed on their fear, not out of cruelty, but necessity. Fear was armor. Respect, after all, was just fear dressed in pearls. As she sat at her table, Catherine scanned the room, her sharp eyes catching every detail: a wrinkled napkin, a waiter's crooked bow tie, a glass filled slightly too low. She said nothing. Her silence was punishment enough. When her husband, Richard Vale, arrived, late as usual, Catherine merely lifted an eyebrow. "You're late." "I was held up," he said softly, sliding into the chair opposite her. "Meeting ran over." "With her?" Catherine asked, her voice as smooth as the silk scarf around her neck. He flinched, barely, but enough for her to know she'd hit the mark. She smiled thinly and turned to the waiter. "Another bottle of Montrachet. This one's lost its chill." The waiter nodded and hurried off, visibly trembling. Catherine leaned back, watching him flee. "Pathetic," she muttered. "Fear keeps them efficient at least." She didn't notice that somewhere behind the kitchen door, a new pair of eyes had just watched her. Eyes that didn't yet know fear, but would soon learn what it meant to stand before Catherine Vale. Elena's hands shook as she tied her apron in the staff room mirror. It wasn't just nerves, it was exhaustion, the kind that sits behind your ribs and hums. 2 weeks ago, she'd arrived in this coastal town with a duffel bag, one pair of shoes, and a promise to herself: no more running. She'd been a waitress before, dingy diners, chain cafes, anywhere that paid just enough to keep her moving. But this place, La Mer Étoilée, was another world. Crystal chandeliers, polished silver, customers whose perfume alone cost more than her rent. Her manager, Lucien, was all starch and superiority. "Elena," he said crisply, "no mistakes. Mrs. Vale is here tonight." She nodded, unsure why the name mattered until she saw the ripple it caused among the staff. Even the head chef's voice dropped when he said it. "Mrs. Vale." "Who is she?" Elena whispered to the hostess beside her. The hostess smirked. "You'll find out. Just don't look her in the eyes too long." Elena smiled faintly, thinking it was a joke. But when she stepped into the dining room for the first time, tray in hand, and her gaze met Catherine Vale's from across the floor, it wasn't a joke. It was a warning. Catherine's laughter, delicate, restrained, cut through the clatter of dishes. Across the room, Elena struggled to balance an overloaded tray. Every movement of hers was effort. Every movement of Catherine's was art. Yet both women carried the same invisible weight: loneliness. Catherine's came wrapped in diamonds, Elena's in silence. As Elena served a table of wealthy guests, she heard snatches of conversation,
gossip about Catherine's lavish parties, her husband's rumored affairs, her power over everyone in this town. Everyone fears her, someone said. Even the mayor. Elena's curiosity sparked. She glanced at the woman again, elegant, poised, yet strangely hollow behind her eyes. Elena didn't know it yet, but something deep in her recognized that emptiness. Later, during her short break, she stood outside near the back entrance, breathing the salty night air. The ocean roared below the cliff, wild and free, a sound Catherine probably hadn't listened to in years. Inside, Catherine sipped her wine and watched her husband's attention drift toward his phone. The distance between them was more painful than any argument. She had everything: money, status, beauty, yet nothing that mattered. Two women, worlds apart, each locked in invisible cages they couldn't see. And fate, cruel, ironic, poetic, was already arranging the pieces for the night they would collide. By closing time, Catherine's patience was thin. The dessert was late, the pianist was off-key, and her husband's indifference scraped her nerves raw. When the new waitress, Elena, appeared at her table for the first time, Catherine barely looked up. "Your dessert, ma'am," Elena said quietly, placing the plate before her. Her voice trembled, but there was a warmth to it, a sincerity Catherine found unsettling. Catherine's eyes lifted, studying her. Young, modest, too gentle. "You're new," she said coldly. "Yes, ma'am." "Then learn quickly. In this place, mistakes cost more than tips."
Elena nodded, but as she turned away, Catherine caught something in her expression. Not fear, something steadier, almost pity. The realization irritated her more than she could admit. Across the room, Richard watched the exchange, his gaze lingering on Elena for a second too long. Catherine noticed. Of course she did. Her diamond-hard smile returned, hiding the storm brewing behind it. Tomorrow, she thought, she would make sure this new waitress understood her place. And just like that, the fuse was lit. What happens when a woman who's ruled through fear is finally challenged? Not by power, but by truth. The next evening, La Mère Étoilée pulsed with tension. Word had spread. Mrs. Catherine Vale was hosting her annual Women of Influence dinner, the social event of the season. No invitation was refused, and no mistake was forgiven. Crystal chandeliers glowed like captured stars. Tables were dressed in gold, each napkin folded into a perfect swan. Behind the kitchen doors, the staff moved in frantic rhythm, knives flashing, orders shouted, sweat mixing with perfume. And there, at the center of the chaos, was Elena. She hadn't slept much. Her first night had left her shaken, the way Catherine Vale had looked through her as if she were air, the weight of those diamond-hard eyes. But she needed this job. Rent was due. Pride wouldn't feed her. Lucien, the manager, approached, already scowling. "You'll handle table 1 tonight." Elena froze. "Mrs. Vale's table?" He sighed. "Yes, smile, serve, and stay invisible. If she notices you, it's already too late." Catherine arrived precisely at 8. The restaurant seemed to bow as she entered, the way conversation softened, the way eyes followed. She loved that moment, the hush before control. Tonight she wore emerald silk, a color few dared to wear near her because it demanded attention. Her jewelry caught every flash of candlelight like lightning. Around her table sat 6 other women, wives, business owners, socialites, each performing admiration with careful laughter. Catherine led effortlessly, her tone precise, her smile razor-sharp. "Did you hear," said one guest, "about the art exhibit? Richard donated a small fortune." Catherine's lips curved. He does like to make gestures. They all laughed, though no one was sure if they were supposed to. Elena approached quietly, tray in hand, her uniform crisp, her movements practiced.
But her heart pounded. She could feel Catherine's presence like static in the air. "Good evening, ladies," she said softly, beginning to pour the wine. Catherine glanced up and froze. That face again, the new girl. Her husband had watched her too long last night. Catherine's fingers tightened on her glass. "Elena, isn't it?" she asked, her tones syrupy and sharp. Elena blinked. "Yes, ma'am." "Where are you from?" "Briar Hill." "Ah, that explains it." The table chuckled lightly. Elena's cheeks burned, but she kept her composure, setting down the bottle with steady hands. "Such dedication," she continued, "working nights, serving others. It must be so humbling." The laughter this time was louder. Catherine leaned back, satisfied. But Elena looked up, meeting her gaze, not with defiance, but quiet steadiness. "It is," she said softly, "but I've found humility teaches us more than pride ever could." The words hung there, gentle yet heavy as thunder. Catherine's smile faltered. Around the table, whispers froze. One of the women coughed to hide a laugh. Another looked down, pretending to fix her napkin. Elena finished pouring the wine, then walked away. Not quickly, not nervously, calmly, gracefully. For the first time in years, Catherine Vale felt the sting of heat rise to her cheeks. In the kitchen, Elena leaned against the counter, her pulse racing. What had she done? The room around her buzzed with gossip, waiters whispering, glances darting. Lucien appeared, eyes wide with panic. "What did you say to her?" he hissed. Elena swallowed. "Nothing rude. She made a joke. About you. She's always right to them, Elena. Always. If she complains, we're finished." Elena turned away, guilt tightening her chest. "I didn't mean to." But she stopped, because she had meant it, in a way, not to humiliate her, but to tell the truth. Still, the fear of losing this job gnawed at her. Back in the dining room, Catherine sat in silence. The conversation at her table had thinned to nervous chatter. A few guests exchanged amused glances. The Queen had been challenged, and no one had ever seen it happen before. Her husband Richard arrived late again. When he leaned in to kiss her cheek, she barely moved. "You're late," she murmured. He smiled faintly. "Traffic." But his eyes followed the waitress who'd just passed. Catherine noticed. Of course she did. Her pulse thud like war drums beneath her calm surface. Dessert came, a tower of chocolate and spun sugar. Elena returned to serve it, her nerves tense like wire. She approached the table, balancing the delicate plate. Catherine, still seething beneath her composed mask, decided she would remind everyone, and Elena, of who she was. "Be careful, dear," she said sweetly, as Elena placed the dessert down. "We wouldn't want you to spill." The word was bait. And fate, cruelly playful, took it. As Elena set the last plate, someone at another table brushed past, bumping her elbow. The dessert wobbled, a streak of chocolate slid across Catherine's immaculate emerald silk. Gasps filled the room. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the silence cracked. Catherine stood abruptly, the sound of her chair scraping like thunder. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she hissed. Elena froze, color draining from her face. "It was an accident." "Of course it was. Isn't it always? Do you even realize how much this dress costs? More than your life, I'm sure." Her laughter, brittle, cruel, echoed through the restaurant. But before Elena could stammer another apology, something inside her broke, not with anger, but with clarity. She looked at Catherine, really looked, beyond the jewels and the silk. She saw the loneliness, the fear, and she smiled gently. "Maybe so," she said softly, "but at least mine isn't for sale." A hush fell. The words landed like a spark in dry grass. Someone near the bar let out a stifled gasp. Catherine's expression shattered. For the first time in years, she had no words. Elena turned and walked towards the kitchen, her heart pounding, terrified, exhilarated, free. Behind her, the queen's crown had cracked, and everyone had seen it happen. Catherine sat down slowly, her face pale, her hands trembling. Laughter, low and uncertain, rippled among the guests. She could feel their pity like acid. Richard leaned closer, his voice low. "She didn't mean it, Kathy." But she barely heard him. Her entire world had tilted. The power she had spent years building had been undone, not by wealth, not by scandal, but by truth spoken from the lips of a waitress. And as she stared at the empty doorway where Elena had disappeared, something burned in her. Fury, yes, but also something strange, something like envy. How do two women, one humiliated, one liberated, face the storm they've unleashed? Morning light spilled across the coast, pale and indifferent. The newspaper delivery boy cycled past La Mer Étoilée, unaware of the storm brewing inside. Elena stood outside the restaurant's back entrance, clutching a crumpled resignation letter, her stomach twisted with anxiety. She hadn't slept. The moment kept replaying. The dessert, the laughter, Catherine's face when she said those words. "At least mine isn't for sale." What had possessed her? That single sentence had felt like freedom at the time, but now it echoed like a death sentence. Lucien appeared behind her, his expression grim. "You're not fired. Yet." Elena turned, startled. "She didn't?" "She hasn't said anything. Not yet. But trust me, she will. You should pray she forgets." He exhaled and rubbed his temples. "Go home. Don't come back until I call. Maybe this will blow over." But Elena knew it wouldn't. Women like Catherine Vale didn't forget. They erased. Catherine Vale stood before her vanity, dabbing concealer under eyes that had known no sleep. Her reflection was perfect, flawless skin, controlled hair, immaculate lips. But something behind the glass had changed. She'd replayed that night 100 times, every second of humiliation etched in her memory. The stifled laughs, the pitying glances, the way Richard's hand had brushed his phone to hide his smirk. Pity. It was worse than hatred. She threw the perfume bottle against the wall. It shattered, filling the room with jasmine and fury. Richard entered, adjusting his tie. "You're still stewing about last night." Catherine turned slowly. "She insulted me in front of everyone." "She's a waitress, Kathy. Nobody cares."
By the next afternoon, every member of the restaurant staff had heard a version of the story. Some pitied Elena. Others admired her. "She stood up to Catherine Vale," one waiter whispered. "Suicidal," another muttered, "but legendary." Elena, meanwhile, hid in her small rented room above a bakery. The walls smelled of sugar and dampness. Her phone buzzed with texts from coworkers. "Lucien says Mrs. Vale hasn't said anything yet. You might still have a chance. Just apologize." She thought about it. Apologize, even when she'd meant no harm. It would be safer, easier. But each time she imagined walking up to Catherine Vale and begging forgiveness, something in her recoiled. Her mother's voice echoed faintly in her memory. "Never bow to cruelty, Elena. The world bends easily enough without your help." Still, fear clawed at her. She couldn't afford to lose another job. That evening, Catherine hosted a dinner party at her mansion. It was damage control, her way of reasserting dominance. But the atmosphere had shifted. Her guests were polite, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. A few whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. The story had mutated. Now, apparently, Catherine had slapped the waitress, and the waitress had quit dramatically. Others said the girl had called her a fraud. Catherine kept her expression serene, but the whispers gnawed at her composure. When Richard raised a toast, his eyes glinted with irony. He said, "To my wife, may she always come out on top, no matter how slippery the floor." The laughter was sharp,
cruel. Catherine's fingers tightened around her glass until her knuckles whitened. Later, she locked herself in the bathroom, trembling. For the first time in years, she realized she was losing control. Not because someone had defied her, but because she no longer believed her own illusion. 2 days later, Elena returned to the restaurant to collect her final paycheck. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside. The maître d' froze at the sight of her. Lucien appeared, his voice low. "You shouldn't be here. I just need what's owed." But before he could reply, a familiar voice drifted from behind. "Let her through." Catherine stood at the entrance, impeccable as always, though her eyes looked tired. Lucien stepped aside. The room seemed to hold its breath. Catherine crossed the floor slowly, heels clicking like a metronome. "So," she said softly, "the brave little waitress returns. I only came for my pay." "You humiliated me," she said, "in front of half the town." "You humiliated yourself," Elena replied quietly. "I just stopped pretending not to notice." Something flickered in Catherine's gaze, shock, then anger, then something almost like respect. "You think you know me," Catherine whispered. "You have no idea what I've sacrificed to survive in this world." Elena met her eyes. "Maybe that's the problem. You stopped surviving and started performing." The silence between them was thick, electric. Then Catherine said coldly, "You'll never work in this town again." Her lips trembled, but her voice was steady. "Then I'll find another one." She turned and walked out, head high. Catherine watched her go, her chest tight with something she couldn't name. Fury tangled with envy, bitterness with longing. For the first time in decades, someone had looked at her and not flinched. That night, Catherine stood on her balcony, staring at the dark sea. Below, the lights of the restaurant glowed faintly, her empire, her reflection, her prison. She thought of Elena's words, "You stopped surviving and started performing." The truth of it stung worse than the humiliation. Inside, Richard poured himself a drink. "You know, maybe she did you a favor. Maybe it's time to stop pretending." Catherine turned sharply. "Pretending what?" "That we're happy. That anyone respects you for who you are." He walked away, leaving her alone with the echo of his words. For once, she didn't fight them. She just stood there, trembling, her perfect facade finally starting to crack. Elena walked along the beach that same night, the wind tearing through her hair. The ocean smelled like freedom and endings. She should have felt broken, unemployed, uncertain, but instead she felt strangely alive. She'd spoken the truth, and for once she hadn't been silenced. Somewhere deep down, she sensed their story wasn't finished. The air between them still hummed with unfinished business, like static before a storm.
The storm left the town washed clean, its streets glittering with morning dew. The restaurant was closed for repairs, windows fogged, tables draped with cloths like sleeping giants. Elena arrived early anyway. She didn't know why. Maybe she wanted to see the place one last time before Lucien officially dismissed her. When she stepped inside, the air was still heavy with salt and lemon polish. She ran her fingers across the counter where she'd once balanced trays, where she'd first met Catherine's stare. Footsteps echoed behind her. Catherine Vale stood in the doorway, wearing a cream sweater instead of her usual armor of silk and jewels. She looked softer, human. Elena straightened. "You're here early." "I could say the same. Habit, I suppose. I don't like unfinished business." They stood facing each other, sunlight pouring through the glass, fragile as truce. Catherine took a breath. Lucian told me you haven't found another job. Elena bristled. I'll manage. I'm sure you will, but I came to offer something different. Elena frowned. You're offering me my job back? No, said Catherine softly. Something better. I'm organizing a charity program, culinary training for women who need a start. I want you to run it. Elena blinked. Me? You have integrity, said Catherine, and courage. Those are rarer than you think. It took Elena a moment to process it. Why me? You barely tolerate me. Catherine smiled faintly. Maybe that's why. You remind me of everything I've forgotten. The silence between them felt almost sacred. They sat by the window with coffee, real conversation for the first time without masks. Catherine spoke about her youth, how she'd grown up in a cramped apartment before marrying Richard. She thought wealth would save me. It only gilded the cage. Elena listened quietly. You can leave the cage, you know. Catherine gave a sad smile. You make it sound simple. It isn't, but it's possible. Catherine stared at her hands. I don't even know what I'd do if I left him. Maybe find out who Catherine is without the veil. For once, Catherine laughed, an unguarded, startled sound that made Elena smile. You're dangerous, Elena Morales. You make honesty sound like rebellion. Maybe it is. That afternoon, the two women drove into town together to visit a local supplier for Catherine's charity project. It was strange, being seen side by side, no longer adversaries. People turned their heads, whispers followed. At a cafe stop, Catherine insisted on paying. Elena rolled her eyes. You don't have to buy my silence. Catherine chuckled. It's not silence I'm buying, it's company. They sat under a striped awning as rain began to drizzle again. Catherine watched the raindrops slide down her cup. You know, I haven't sat outside like this in years. Why not? Too exposed, said Catherine. Too ordinary. Elena smiled. Ordinary isn't so bad. Catherine looked at her then, really looked. You believe that. I envy you. For a moment, they just listened to the rain. Back at the restaurant, Catherine insisted on helping with prep work for the new training menu. She fumbled with an apron, clearly unused to kitchen life. Elena couldn't help laughing. You tie it like you're strangling yourself, Elena said, stepping behind her to adjust the knot. Catherine tried not to laugh, but failed. The sound, light, genuine, filled the kitchen like music. Lucian peeked in, stunned. He'd never seen Mrs. Vale laugh at anything that wasn't someone's misfortune. Catherine caught Elena's eye. If anyone asks, tell them I was making me laugh against my will. Deal. By the end of the afternoon, flour dusted Catherine's sleeves and Elena's cheeks ached from smiling. The air between them had changed. No longer tension, something gentler, almost friendship. As the sun dipped low, they sat again in the quiet dining room. Catherine stared out at the horizon. You think people can really change, Elena? Yes. Even me? Elena met her eyes. Especially you. Catherine's voice wavered. I've spent years building walls. Every cruel word, every manipulation, it was a brick. I didn't realize I'd trapped myself inside. Elena reached across the table, hesitated, then placed her hand on Catherine's. The gesture startled them both. Catherine didn't pull away. Her hand trembled under Elena's, fragile as thawing ice. I don't remember the last time someone touched me without expecting something, she whispered. Then maybe it's time to start remembering. Catherine swallowed hard. The moment was brief, tender, terrifying. Later that night, Catherine returned home to the mansion that suddenly felt enormous and cold. Richard was in his study, oblivious. She stood in the doorway, watching him scroll his phone. "Richard?" she said quietly. He didn't look up. "What now?" "I'm leaving." She froze. "Don't be dramatic." "I'm serious." He looked up then, eyes narrowing. "And go where?" "I don't know. Somewhere real." He laughed. "You won't last a week without the attention." Catherine smiled faintly. "Then I'll finally be free to fail." She left him sitting there, stunned. Upstairs, she packed a small bag and wrote a short note to the housekeeper. "Thank you for staying even when I didn't deserve it." Then she opened her window and breathed the night air, feeling the weight lift, molecule by molecule. The next morning, Elena arrived early again to prepare the kitchen. When she turned around, Catherine was there. No chauffeur, no diamonds, just a suitcase and a hesitant smile. "Good morning," she said softly. Elena blinked. "You're leaving?" "Yes, but not far. I thought maybe I could help train the women too, teach them what not to become." Elena's lips curved. "That's a start." Catherine looked around the empty restaurant, sunlight spilling across the floor. "It's strange," she murmured. "I used to think this place was my throne. Now it feels like a beginning." Elena handed her an apron. "Then you'd better learn to tie this properly." Catherine laughed again, unpolished, free. God help us all. By midday, the restaurant buzzed with new energy. Catherine worked beside Elena, fumbling, learning, laughing. She spilled flour, burned bread, nearly dropped a pan. But she didn't snap or sneer. She just laughed. At one point, Elena looked at her and said softly, "You're different." Catherine met her gaze. "You made me remember that I could be." For once, neither of them felt like the lesser woman. Outside, sunlight streamed through the glass, glinting on the ocean beyond. Two silhouettes worked side by side, one who had learned to forgive and one who had taught her to. The world, for a moment, was still.
2 weeks passed, and the restaurant felt like a different world. Catherine Vale, once the feared queen of the coast, now spent her mornings teaching single mothers and young women how to host, cook, and present themselves with confidence, not for approval, but for pride. Elena watched her with quiet admiration. Catherine's laughter filled the air where fear used to live. The staff, once terrified of her, now teased her gently when she dropped a tray or mispronounced a dish name. It was imperfect, it was human, and it was beautiful. But peace rarely lasts long where pride has lived too long. The past doesn't die quietly. It waits for silence, then knocks. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, as the kitchen hummed with soft chatter, Lucian hurried in with a pale face and trembling hands. "Mrs. Vale," he said, "you need to see this." He handed her his phone. On the screen was an article from the Coastal Post. "Fall from grace. Catherine Vale's sudden philanthropy raises questions. Is the former socialite hiding a scandal?" Below it was a picture. Catherine and Elena, side by side, laughing in the kitchen. The caption read, "Ex-waitress turned savior? The millionaire's wife trades diamonds for guilt." Catherine's chest tightened. Her first instinct was old, familiar, to lash out, to demand names, to control the narrative. But then she saw the comments. "Look at her pretending to be humble. Poor waitress, bet she's being used. Nothing real about these rich women's redemption stories."
Elena walked in mid-silence, wiping flour from her hands. "What's wrong?" Catherine hesitated, then turned the phone toward her. Her eyes scanned the screen. "They're twisting everything." Catherine's voice was sharp. "It doesn't matter. We'll issue a statement." "No," Elena said. "Ignore it. The truth will show." Catherine's control cracked. "You don't understand how this works. I've lived under their gaze for years. They will never stop." Her tone, sharp, commanding, felt like the old Catherine again. Elena stepped back. "So what? You'll play their game again? I thought you were done with that." Catherine froze. The words stung because they were true. By evening, the restaurant buzzed with tension. Catherine's voice carried orders again, precise and cold. "Clean that counter properly. Fold those napkins evenly. Presentation matters." The staff glanced at each other nervously, the warmth of the past weeks evaporating. Elena watched from the corner, her heart heavy. She saw the way Catherine's posture stiffened, the mask reforming, the distance rebuilding. When she finally approached, Catherine was on the phone with a journalist, her voice measured but icy. "Yes, this was my idea. Elena Morales assists me." Elena's stomach twisted. "Assists me?" When Catherine hung up, Elena said quietly, "You could have told them the truth, that we built it together." Catherine's tone was clipped. They wouldn't take it seriously if they thought a waitress ran it. The silence between them splintered. "You mean they wouldn't take me seriously?" "That's not what I said." "It's what you meant." Catherine turned away, pain flickering in her eyes. "I'm trying to protect what we built." "No," Elena said. "You're protecting your ego." The words landed like a slap. Catherine's breath hitched. "You have no idea what it costs to rebuild a reputation." Elena's voice broke. "And you have no idea what it costs to keep your dignity." She pulled off her apron and walked out. Catherine didn't stop her. Pride glued her tongue in place. That night, Catherine sat alone in the restaurant, staring at the empty tables. The articles still trended online. The phone buzzed endlessly. Reporters, acquaintances, even Richard, who'd left a voicemail dripping with sarcasm. "Nice to see you finally found a new audience to perform for." She poured herself a drink, hands trembling. For a fleeting second, she considered calling Elena, to apologize, to explain, to beg her to come back. But the old voice inside her whispered, "Don't be weak." Instead, she typed an email to the paper's editor, trying to reclaim control. Her words were polished, careful, proud, and hollow. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. Then she closed the laptop and whispered, "I ruined it." Elena sat on the beach, knees pulled to her chest, the ocean dark and restless. She'd spent years surviving humiliation, but this time it hurt differently. Because she'd trusted Catherine. She'd believed in her change. Her phone buzzed. A message from one of the trainees. "Thank you for everything, Miss Elena. Mrs. Vale's been crying in the kitchen. Should I stay?" Elena's heart ached. She typed back, "No, let her rest." She stared at the horizon, waves crashing in rhythm with her pulse. She wanted to forgive Catherine. She wanted to walk back and fix it. But the wound was too fresh, the betrayal too sharp. At dawn, Catherine returned to the restaurant, alone again, just as before. The kitchen smelled of stale coffee and regret. She stood at the counter where she'd once ruled, her reflection staring back from a steel pan. A woman stripped of pretense, left only with the ruins of pride. She reached for her phone and opened the photo of her and Elena laughing. The memory hurt like sunlight on a bruise. Lucian entered quietly.
"Mrs. Vale." "Catherine," she corrected. "Just Catherine." He nodded. "Elena's not coming back?" "I wouldn't," she said softly. "Not after what I said." Lucian hesitated. "She believed in you." Catherine smiled sadly. "So did I. That's what makes it worse." Catherine drove home slowly, through streets that once felt like her kingdom. Everywhere she looked, she saw ghosts, of fear, of admiration, of herself. When she reached her driveway, she didn't go inside. She sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. She whispered, "You wanted power, and when someone offered you love, you turned it into a weapon." Tears spilled silently down her face. For the first time, she didn't hide them. That night, both women lay awake, miles apart, but bound by the same ache. Elena replayed Catherine's words. They wouldn't take it seriously if they thought a waitress ran it. Catherine replayed Elena's reply. "You're protecting your ego." Different wounds, same truth. Both had been fighting to be seen, and both had ended up blind. The storm outside had passed, but inside each heart another one raged, the kind that only truth could calm. When everything breaks, what remains? Pride or love? Days passed, and the scandal faded from the headlines. But for Catherine and Elena, silence had taken its place, heavier than any gossip. The restaurant reopened, quieter, emptier. Catherine kept the charity program running, but her smile had vanished. The women she trained whispered among themselves. "She's changed again," one said. "She's colder." Elena, meanwhile, found work at a small cafe by the docks. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Still, every time she wiped a counter or poured a cup of coffee, she thought of Catherine, the way she had laughed in the kitchen, the warmth of her hand on hers. Neither could let go. Neither could reach out. One night, Catherine sat in her study, paper scattered, a half-empty glass of wine by her hand. She opened her laptop, started typing. "Elena, I wanted to tell you that you were right. I was protecting my ego, not our work. I've spent my life fighting to be respected, and I didn't realize I'd forgotten how to respect others. You saw me, and I punished you for it. I'm sorry." She stopped. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. "But if she doesn't forgive me?" The fear was sharp, childlike. Catherine Vale, who had once terrified entire rooms, was now terrified of being ignored. She closed the laptop without saving. The next morning, one of the young women from the program, Rosa, visited the cafe where Elena now worked. She was clutching a small flour-dusted envelope. "She told me not to bring this," Rosa said, eyes nervous. "But I couldn't watch her drown in pride any longer." Elena hesitated, then took the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note, shaky but unmistakably Catherine's.
2 months later, the sun rose over the harbor like a slow promise. La Mer Étoilée was alive again, its doors open, its kitchen filled with laughter, its table set for a new season. But beneath the calm, a familiar tension lingered. Rumors of Richard Vale's return had spread through town. He wanted his wife back, or at least his control. Catherine stood by the window, watching the sea. She'd cut her hair shorter, let the gray show. There was peace in her face now, and steel. Elena entered with a stack of invoices. "Big night ahead," she said lightly. "The charity galas sold out." Catherine smiled. "Funny, isn't it? They mocked me for changing. Now they're paying to applaud it." But as she said it, her eyes darkened, because in the back of her mind, she heard his voice. "Don't be dramatic." Elena noticed the shift.
Still nervous about seeing him? Catherine looked away. He was my mirror for too long. It's hard to stop checking your reflection. The gala was grand but humble, a paradox that fit Catherine perfectly. The room glowed with candles and music, and for the first time, the town did not see the millionaire's wife. They saw a woman who had rebuilt herself. Then, the doors opened. Richard Vail entered in his signature black suit, his smile charming and cold. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Catherine," he said smoothly, approaching, "you've been busy." "Some of us have to work for our redemption," she replied evenly. He leaned closer. "Come home." "This is home," she said. Elena, watching from the edge of the room, saw the muscles tighten in Catherine's jaw. It was the old battle all over again, power versus freedom. Richard turned to the crowd, voice booming. "I'd like to make a donation," he announced, "a symbol of reconciliation." The audience clapped politely. Catherine stood frozen. He continued, smiling like a man performing charity to mask control. "I support my wife's little project. It's good to see her use her energy for something sweet and harmless." The words stabbed. Sweet. Harmless. It was the old Richard again, dismissing, belittling. Catherine's hand tightened around her glass. For a moment, she almost slipped back into silence. Then she caught Elena's eyes across the room, steady, unflinching, reminding her who she'd become. She set the glass down and walked to the stage. "Thank you, Richard," she said into the microphone, her voice clear. "And thank you for reminding me how easy it is to lose yourself to approval." A ripple of uneasy laughter spread. She continued, "I used to think power was measured by how many people feared you. Now I know it's measured by how many people you lift when you rise." She turned toward Elena. "This project is not mine alone. It belongs to Elena Morales, who taught me that humility isn't weakness. It's truth." The room erupted in applause, real this time. Even the reporters lowered their phones to listen. Richard stood rigid, humiliation twisting his smile. He left without another word. When the gala ended, Catherine found Elena by the back entrance where the night smelled of salt and roses. "I didn't plan to say all that," Catherine admitted, breathless. "I know," Elena said softly. "You just finally spoke from the part of you that was real." Catherine laughed, a sound half relief, half tears. "I was terrified." "Good," Elena said. "Means you were alive." They stood in the quiet for a moment. Catherine reached out, took Elena's hand briefly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I almost did," Elena admitted, "but then I remembered how far you'd come and how far I had too." Weeks later, the training program expanded into a foundation. They named it the Second Chance Kitchen. Every woman who walked through its doors found not just skills, but a mirror of hope. Catherine and Elena worked side by side. They still argued, still challenged each other, but the fights no longer ended in walls. They ended in understanding. One afternoon, Elena joked, "You realize you're still bossy, right?" Catherine smiled. "I prefer as assertive with taste. It's an upgrade." They laughed until their sides hurt, a sound that once would have been unthinkable. One evening, long after closing, Catherine walked to the old mirror that had hung in her office for years. The mirror she once used to perfect her smile before destroying someone else's day. She studied her reflection. No makeup, hair tousled, eyes tired but kind. Then she took a marker and wrote across the glass, "You are enough without fear." Elena appeared in the doorway. "New motto?" Catherine said. knew truth. They stood together watching the words glow in the dim light. A month later, a young reporter came to interview them for a follow-up story. "So, Mrs. Vale, or should I say, Ms. Vale, what changed?" Catherine smiled. "Everything and nothing. The woman you wrote about before was trapped in a mirror. This one finally stepped out of it." Elena added, "She didn't fall from grace. She learned what grace really means." The reporter smiled awkwardly, unsure how to write a story that didn't fit the usual villain-turned-victim narrative. And that was fine. This story wasn't for headlines anymore. It was for hearts. That night, after everyone left, Elena and Catherine stood on the terrace overlooking the sea. The moonlight danced on the water. "Do you ever miss the old life?" Elena asked. Catherine shook her head. "I miss the woman I pretended to be sometimes, but only because she reminds me how free I am now." Elena smiled. "Then we did it." Catherine looked at her. "No, we're doing it." The waves crashed softly below, like applause from a gentler world. And as the wind moved through their hair, the two women, once divided by class, fear, and pride, stood side by side, reborn not as opposites, but as equals. Every town still tells its stories, but now, when people speak of Catherine Vale, they don't say the millionaire's wife. They say the woman who learned to listen. And when they speak of Elena Morales, they don't say the waitress who defied her. They say the woman who taught her how to begin again. Some stories don't end with power lost or gained, but with hearts made real. If you've ever faced someone who seemed unreachable, remember, kindness can crack stone. What begins in fear can end in freedom if you dare to forgive. Thank you for staying through the story. Subscribe and like this channel for more stories.